Once upon a time there was the Simple series, most prominently on the PlayStation 2 as Simple 2000 series, and while I've shown a few examples of them before, here they are again. Okay, then Simple series still exists to this day, but they are nothing like they were back then. Sure, a lot of shitty games got released under that label, but also a lot of surprisingly decent ones, or even good ones. Some of those really good ones were able to branch out of the Simple label and go on as their own franchises, like Onechanbara or Earth Defense Force. This is Puzzle Quest: Challenge of the Warlords for the PlayStation 2, the version I will be playing. But actually, this is a port of the PSP version that was labeled a Simple 2500 game in Japan, after its European and North American release, so it actually isn't a real Simple series game. And yeah, while on the PlayStation 2 there was the Simple 2000 series, and on the PSP it was called Simple 2500 series. So let's dive into the game, and this fact might make or break Puzzle Quest for you immediately at the start. It's a puzzle game. Not any kind of puzzle game, it's match 3. So if you don't like match 3 games, then dive out now. Personally, I don't mind playing something like this from time to time. In actuality, I like puzzle games of any kind and can have a decent amount of fun with them. Intelligent Cube, Mercury Meltdown, Kotodama, Luminous, Devil Dice, Katamari, Catherine, Murder by Numbers, you name it. So when I started playing Puzzle Quest, this is the first one of the franchise by the way, I knew what to expect. But at the same time I didn't. One step at a time though. If you don't know how to play match 3, then the idea is pretty simple. Here you have gems that are colored red, green, blue and yellow, and your goal is to get rid of them by matching 3 or more together, either vertically or horizontally. Your mission is to win against your opponent that will try to take you down by doing the same thing. Well, almost, because the gems themselves don't do any damage. That's why this is more complex than simply matching colors. What matching the gems ultimately does is raise these mana bars that you will need to activate certain abilities you can use during battle. So while the gems by themselves won't directly attack the enemy in any way, shape or form, they still are needed so you can use the abilities that might damage the enemy. Might, depending on the ability. Other than the 4 colors I've mentioned, there are also these purple stars that actually are your experience points. Yes, this is somewhat of a match 3 RPG, let's call it that. Essentially, you will need these purple stars to level up, get stronger and whatever, you know. The more you match, the more experience you will get and the quicker you will reach max level of 50. I was often finding myself trying to match the stars to level up instead of defeating the enemy, but do you really need to level up? That's an interesting question actually, because the answer is not really. While you will level up automatically, being it because you simply can't avoid the purple stars on the grid, or because you will gain purple stars after every win and even loss, you don't need to grind at all. Mainly because most enemies level with you anyway. Usually only the bosses can have a higher level than you, but that's about it. But even then there is no need to worry. I mean, just look at this example. Yeah, you can conquer kingdoms, but I will get to that. Here, this kingdom has over 300 HP while I don't even have 200 HP. Sure, it takes quite a while to bring those 300 plus HP down to 0, but it's doable. Because the game actually cares more about you having skill and a bit of luck than you being overpowered and overleveled, so you can have an easier time defeating the enemy. That's quite a nice touch actually. What goes for the purple stars also goes for money. Yes, you will also need money in the game, but I will get to that. Skulls will also happen. Whoever matches at least 3 of those together will do damage to the opponent, and obviously the goal here is to take your opponent down by reducing their HP to 0. But sometimes black skulls will happen as well, which are more powerful than the white ones and thus do more damage. They can be matched with white skulls to damage the opponent as well, but unlike the white skulls that explode on the board only on the square they were on, the black skulls explode and take everything that was one square around them. These colored squares are called wild cards that can be matched with any color to complete a match 3 and add more points to your mana bars. The number in the wild card itself indicates the extra points you will get to fill them up. These wild cards usually only happen when matching 5 gems of the same color, and you will get an extra turn on top of it. Unlike when you match just 4, you will only get an extra turn. And by the way, if you are lucky enough to get 5 matches, not a match of 5 but 5 matches in a single turn, then you get a heroic effort. What this does is, it just gives you extra XP and that's about it, so it's not really worth it. But you won't ever find yourself working towards a heroic effort anyway, since you only get 1 if you are lucky. You might be lucky and get a match 4 or even a match 5 in one of those 5 matches for a heroic effort, but many times you will only get the regular match 3-5 times. So who cares about a heroic effort? Okay, on the grid itself, this was basically it. Now let's look here. This is your avatar, one that you can choose in the beginning of the game. You have 4 classes, Knight, Warrior, Wizard and Druid, and each class has 4 characters. While each class has its differences and advantages, whoever you choose doesn't matter for the story, because it's always the same. These mana bars are filled by the colored gems you match. As explained previously, you will want to fill these to max as soon as possible to be able to use your abilities as soon as possible. The abilities are here. The requirement needed to activate these are shown here. Each ability shows how many gems you need to be able to activate them and either do damage to the opponent, defend yourself, change the gems on the board, etc. As it's usual for RPGs, you also can equip yourself. Here you can use weapons, helmets, armors and runes to increase your stats or get extras indicated in these 4 squares. You can buy some of those in shops, but I will get to that. Finally, here is your resistance, meaning the higher the number, for example on the red resistance shield, the higher the probability that you can block an enemy's ability that requires red gems. When it comes to the navigation itself, your cursor is essentially fixed on the gem grid, but by pressing L1 you change it to your, let's call it, information grid, and by then pressing circle, detailed information appears for each effect of your abilities, weapons or whatever. You know, in case you forget what your abilities do. You can do the same with the enemy by pressing R1. This version of match 3 is the only one where you need to pay attention to not do any wrong moves, like not matching gems or something, because you will lose HP if you do mismatch, and depending on the enemy, you need every single HP available to you. Don't worry though, I will get to the match 3 versions of this game as we go along. But since this is a western style fantasy world, you will fight elves, minotaurs, knights, dragons, zombies, etc. So it certainly has enemy variety for sure, which makes the world fairly interesting to move around and explore. Before I go to the rest of the game and what it has to offer, let's stay on the meat for a little longer, since this is what you are gonna be doing a lot. Now, while fairly fun to play and it surely has something very addicting about it, Puzzle Quest still isn't a cakewalk. Well, maybe on the easy difficulty it is, but on the normal difficulty, some battles will enrage you. I don't even want to think about how the hard difficulty is. Yeah, there are 3 difficulties in here for your choosing pleasure. You can also play with a time limit per turn by default. So if you are an expert, a maniac, or just simply hate yourself, then play on hard with just 4 seconds per turn. What happens if you let the timer run out? You simply lose HP and have to wait for your next turn. So about that cakewalk I was talking about. Once gems, skulls, stars or coins are matched, they disappear and new ones come down from the top. That random nature in itself is fine, since nobody knows which gems are gonna come down next, and if they are gonna help you or the enemy. So it adds a lot of suspense to the game, where you constantly have to rethink your strategy based on the new gems that fell from the top. But at the same time, the randomness of it can also be a very negative thing, because, at least in my playthrough, whatever fell down tended to help the enemy at least 80% of the time. Especially towards the end, it will seem like the game is cheating or simply hates you by giving the enemy a lot of gems he needs, skulls that explode immediately or whatever. Seems kinda rigged to me. If you keep losing to an enemy over and over again each time you battle him, then he becomes somewhat easier to defeat. I am not sure if that is indeed the case, but oftentimes it seems like that because the enemy completely destroyed me in the first round, but by rebattling him again, he seems a little easier. Especially regarding the skulls, by the 3rd or 4th rematch, the enemy also tends to ignore skulls more often for some reason. Rather weird why that happens, or maybe it was on purpose. Or maybe, just maybe, I am drunk and seeing things. Who knows? So even if you lose over and over, there is no problem in trying again, because there are no real consequences for losing. You can always fight the enemy all over again, you don't even die in your quest or anything like that. The only thing that happens is you see a game over screen, but it's not really a game over, you just lost a battle. It would have been more interesting if you also died in your quest with your current avatar and had to choose a new avatar to continue the journey or something, instead of just going back to the world map or retry. Now the characters that you can choose as your avatar. Story-wise, like I've said, they literally make no difference. After I've beaten the story with my knight Naripin, I've restarted the story with a druid and then with a wizard, and played for a while, but nothing changed. The characters are the same, the dialogue is essentially the same, the story is the same, everything is the same outside of your avatar and your advantage in battle, since, once again, each class has its advantages and disadvantages. That's a bit sad actually. It would have been cool if each class had its own path, unique dialogues, unique kingdoms, etc. But what can you do? And yeah, seeing how long the game actually is and that you will be playing match 3 constantly, then maybe it was for the better to not have different paths. Seriously, when I started playing and realized what this game is, I thought it would take me only about 6, maybe 8 hours max to beat it. I mean, it's just match 3 after all, right? Sure, it has heavy RPG elements, but still. When I beat the game after 62 hours, I went, holy shit, I'm finally done. However, I cleared around 95% of all side quests and conquered almost all kingdoms. Not only that, I also got quite a few abilities from monsters I've captured, and none of this is required to do. But combine all of this with the fact that I lost a lot, as shown here because the game likes to point out how much of a loser I am, then you can see why it took me so long to beat it. This is the world map. You will walk around from point to point and do main quests, indicated in red, and side quests, indicated in white. Repeatable quests are in blue. You only get quests by visiting kingdoms, but you don't necessarily need to conquer them. Yes, you can actually conquer these kingdoms, and while an interesting idea, all you can do is use the citadel if you conquer a kingdom and get money each time you visit it. It would have been cool if you could also order your kingdom to take down enemies for you or something. After all, you conquered the kingdom, so shouldn't you be able to give them orders? Outside of kingdoms, you will visit villages and caves as well on your missions, and some are only unlocked by doing certain side quests. Wherever you go on the map, sometimes you will have to fight minotaurs, humans, dragons, elves, zombies, whatever that is in your way. You can see them on the field, but you still can't avoid them. If you wanna go to wherever you need to go, you actually have to beat them. And if you can't, then they won't move out of the way. The enemies remain there until you can beat them, which is rather fucking annoying. Even enemies that are far weaker than you can't be avoided or ignored for some reason, which makes the game unnecessarily tedious. I had occasions where I actually could avoid them, but I have no idea what I did to even get that option, because 99% of the time I was forced to battle them. Even after capturing the monster being double his level or whatever, he still needs to be defeated over and over again. Just why? It's like Puzzle Quest was specifically designed to waste your time and does not respect it. If I've captured the monster, then at least give me the option to be able to ignore the fight with them every time. So yes, you can capture enemies after you've beaten them a certain amount of times, which is usually 5 times. If you want to capture it, you will play match 3 as usual, but a different version of it. Here you just need to get rid of every gem and skull to capture the monster, and that's about it. Well, it's a change of pace and not bad, but it ultimately is just match 3 again. What the capturing does is it allows you to get access to some unique spells and abilities from those enemies that you can use in battle. You won't get them right away though, you actually need to fight for those spells or abilities. By playing match 3 again. When you go to your citadel, go to research spells, and there you will find all the spells you can learn from the monsters you've captured. The difficulty is indicated, and there you go. This time you don't have an opponent, you just need to meet the requirements as shown here, and you've got the spell. You get these scrolls, or whatever the fuck they are, by matching 4 or 5 gems together, and then matching the scrolls themselves together. Sounds annoying at first, but it really isn't. This was actually the most fun version of match 3 I've played here. However, pay attention. Unlike the normal battles, where once nobody can do any more moves, the board and the mana bars basically reset, but the battle still continues. In this version of match 3, it's an immediate game over and you have to restart everything. Yeah, it's more challenging than the regular match 3, but easily as fun. And frustrating. You can also forge new items by combining 3 runes together. Usually you will find runes and caves on the world map, and yes, you will have to defeat an enemy first. Forging items works similar to the spells actually. You choose your combination and then have to play match 3. This time with the only difference being that you will have to destroy a certain amount of anvils, but again, it's instant game over once you can't do any more moves. Only when training your mounts you will have to battle like usual, but with a time limit. The higher the level your mount is, or you want it to be, the shorter the time limit. But why do you need a mount in the first place? Well, mostly to move slightly faster on the world map, but other than that, yeah, you don't really need them at all. Again, a missed opportunity. Since you can choose to ride on mounts, it would have been cool if you used the mount in battle against the enemy as well, that also is using a mount. The money isn't actually used for much. You can use it to upgrade your stats or buy stuff in shops that you don't really need actually. All the necessary weapons, helmets and whatever you will ever need are won in battles by doing quests. But before you can even forge items, train your mounts or whatever, you will need to build the citadel itself by buying every department. But once you've bought everything in one kingdom, you bought it on every kingdom as well. Finally, there is actually an interesting lore to explore here, but a bit generic in parts, and ultimately it all comes down to just save the world. So you have a knight, or whichever avatar/class you wanna use. Your avatar is a descendant of a famous warrior from centuries ago, but you are still in training. You have to do some stuff for the queen you are under at first. There is conflict between kingdoms, races and creatures. Once you discover stuff about the undead that started to walk around and cause chaos, then you start to investigate to find out who the actual mastermind is, and your goal is to defeat him to save the world once again, but this time for good. Yeah, since you are the descendant of a famous warrior that defeated the current revived threat some centuries ago, you now have to do the same thing. But this time, since you aren't an idiot, you will defeat him forever. Or maybe until the next puzzle quest game, who knows. The side quests can add some small subplots about characters you've recruited to your team as well, which enhances the lore a bit more, just like the taverns do as well. In the taverns you will hear rumors and stuff, and that also enhances the lore a bit. So overall, the developers actually did a nice and quite interesting job here. It was actually fun to explore the world, to learn about the characters, to fight the variety of enemies, to have the option to do side quests where some even give you multiple choice answers, etc. Still, it could have been expanded a bit more, especially when this part of the map isn't even used, or a few characters don't really shine as they should have. But maybe the sequels expand the universe they've created here, who knows? It's not over yet however, because as much fun I actually had playing Puzzle Quest, the game still is far longer than it needs to be. You will have to do hundreds of battles, and because of it, the game will get monotonous and somewhat tedious over time. And that is actually the major flaw in Puzzle Quest. Sure, they've tried to add some variety to the match 3 formula, but in the end it's all just match 3. So it will get annoying to have to do the same exact thing every single time with no way to avoid battles in the world map on top of it. Maybe making the game shorter would have helped. Sure, the story would maybe have to suffer because of it, but then again, even during the story I think there are parts that don't really need to be there. Like, they are simply there to add length to the game just for the sake of it. So unless you have a lot of patience, time and are one of those people that refuse to not finish what they've started, then I bet that most people would either take a year to beat Puzzle Quest because it is monotonous, despite it being just 50 to 60 hours long, or simply quit because of its unnecessary length and annoying factor at times. But let's end this on a good note, sort of. Puzzle Quest's music is actually quite nice and isn't loudly in your face. But there aren't many real theme songs going on. While the title screen and when you win and / lose have their own themes, for example, the ending theme is the music you've already heard 100 times during battles. But hey, you are victorious! For some reason I find it funny how she says victorious. On top of it, I actually like the characters and monster designs as well, though some are a bit generic. But during dialogue, the characters are just still pictures and there are no animations, no visual reactions to anything. Quite a shame. Match 3 might be very boring for some, which I can understand, and I will say that I haven't played that many Match 3 games, but Puzzle Quest actually does a fine job combining that with a decent amount of strategy to it, with the abilities and weapons and whatever, and the RPG nature. It certainly has an addicting factor to it, which is one reason I kept playing instead of quitting. The game simply does quite a lot right, but it still could be much better, and it certainly could be far less tedious. After this one, I probably won't be playing Match 3 for a while, but at some point I certainly will tackle the rest of the series for sure.
You are victorious!